Okay. So the last time we talked, we had gone through diagnosis, some of the pitfalls, some of the things that you require to be able to see clearly. And some of that were things that you had to do with your own mind, and some of that was a sort of understanding of the classics, how nature works and how that working of that nature is reflected in the body. And I guess what we'd like to do is kind of hone in. One of the things that we talked about was what you referred to as the great sweeping motions, which is a sort of, I think, understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's an understanding of really what's distinctive about how conformations work. Does that make sense? And when we asked you which of those you'd like to talk about, you said that you would like to talk about the pivot transformations, which is fantastic because those are the ones that I understand least. I think that idea of pivoting is a little difficult and requires clear explanation. So why don't we just start with that? Let's take a look first at the physiology of those two pivoting great sweeping motions and how they're supposed to work when they're working in a sort of healthy fashion.
Yeah, well, first, the idea of pivoting is from the Neijing, and the Neijing talks about it's like kai he shu, which means to open, to close, and to pivot. And so there are 6 great sweeping motions, and 2 of them open, 2 of them close, and 2 of them pivot. And so it's one organization of the great sweeping motions that, to organize them according to open, close, and pivot. So the 2 conformations, great sweeping motions that pivot are the Shao Yin and the Shao Yang. And so, what does that mean? There's lots of discussion and commentary written about open, close, and pivot. But basically, and sorry if I'm just going off on this and not necessarily answering your question, but in the last video, we talked about the yin yang symbol and the circular motion that is related to the 4 directions and the movement of the sun around the earth, rising in the east and zenithing in the south, setting in the west, and being under the earth at night. And so that's a wheel, right? That's a turning of a wheel. And so in order for a wheel to turn, it has to pivot. And it's also kind of likened to the hub sometimes, or the axle of the wheel. But so, there's a lot of discussion about what does that mean? And so I have my own thoughts about what it means. Some of the commentary feels a little bit convoluted to me and not necessarily very helpful. And so my understanding is sort of based on this whole idea of yin yang descending into the body and expressing it back out. And so what does the pivot mean? And so one thing is that when dynamics are coming into me from heaven, which is something that comes in through the West, because the West is where descent happens. So we have yang life force up above in the form of the sun, and it comes down into me. I take food in from above, it comes down into me, so that movement down is a condensing movement, right? It's taking something vast and condensing it down to become me. It comes into me. Like there's the sun, it's vast, 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 all this food, and I condense it down to become me. and then I express that back out again. So we can say that that part of the cycling is a condensing movement from above to below. We could say from the south through the west into the north, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. So so then there's also the other half of the yin yang symbol, which is going back up and out. And so, you know, the wheel turning has both of those movements. And the one going back up and out is more, you know, expansive, you know, so there's condensing and then there's expanding, going back out into the world. So that is sort of the basics of the two pivots. And but we want to talk about why they're called pivots as well. And maybe, and am I answering your question? I'm not sure.
You absolutely are. Yes. So we're imbibing things into the body and we're sort of concentrating them as the body processes them. But then once all of that stuff is sort of processed until you've gotten it sort of almost, you know, the process of sort of retrieving essence maybe from food or something like that, that needs to be distributed outwards in such a way that it's usable by the body. That's what you're saying?
Yes, yes.
Keep
It
going.
becomes useful. I can digest with that. I can, and we're taking in through food, we're taking in yang and yin because the food is filled with warmth and light as well as fluids. And we're also taking in yang from heaven. It's spirit, it's fire, it's coming into my body from heaven. We're taking in light actually. Now, we'll start with the Shaoyin as a pivot. And so if you think of this yang coming in from above, and we really think a lot about the yang because the life force is warm. Because when we're dead, we're cold. There's no life force left. There's plenty of form, but there's no life force. And so the life force that's coming into me is yang. So that yang is coming down from heaven. And in order to be usable from a vertical motion, it has to pivot and become a fire that's like under a cooking pot of my body. It has to become the ministerial fire. So that imperial fire from heaven that comes through my heart and down into my kidneys, into my dantian, it has to pivot in order to become the ministerial fire, which is an upward moving fire, right? So it has to change direction from vertical downward to vertical upward. Does
So
that make sense?
yes, so would you consider, because we're talking on the one hand about absorbing things from the outside environment, so we said the sunlight directly or indirectly, I suppose, because the sunlight goes into the food goes into us.
That's right.
And then we've got the food, we've got the drink, we've maybe even got the oxygen that's coming in. Would you consider then that the warmth that's coming from the heart itself, so that imperial fire, is another one of those things that comes up from the top and goes down? Or are you only
Yes.
talking about things that come from outside?
Yes. It
Oh,
comes in through the heart and comes down. And
okay.
it depends on the pathway of the Yangming in order to descend,
Oh,
right?
okay.
You know,
So,
so why is it that Yangming pathology gets so hot? Because it's the pathway of the life force. And if it gets blocked, it's imagine if you have a sunny day in the summer and the sun got blocked at noon and couldn't go down. It would
things
just get
dry up.
hotter and drier and hotter and drier, right? And
Mm,
that's what happens in our body. If it gets blocked on the way down, then it's our own life force that's actually building up, that's coming in from the heart. And actually Yangming pathology often leads to mania, like it really backs up into the heart
mm.
and causes mania. So
That
go
explains
ahead.
that explains why That explains why, using something like Chayu Jalongu Mulitang, for example, with the Dahwang, would address mania, because the Dahwang would restore that ability for all that heat to just go all the way through and not back up into the heart.
It's kind of taking a little plug out. I mean, it's got a small dose of Dahwang, but it's like we're opening the pivot. So with the Chai Hu Huangqin, and then also the pivot opens, so the ministerial fire can now not be blocked and pathological, but
So,
become physiological ministerial fire. Yeah.
so a couple of questions. Number one, that process of like coming from top and coming all the way down and then condensing, would you associate that with certain conformations, like that process? So it depends on Yangming, but are you saying that the function of Yangming is to produce that condensation, or just to allow it through, and another conformation is what produces that sort of?
Well, Yangming is kind of like this vertical movement down, and it's a yang conformation, so it's a pathway that can get blocked.
Mhm.
Yin conformations have to do with being strong enough. Are they strong enough? Yang conformations have to be able to move freely, right? And so here's Yangming, it has to be able to move freely. And so food and fluids are coming down, but also in that process, they're being transformed by the spleen and absorbed into the spleen, right? That happens on the way down.
Right.
And, but also the Shao Yin is the movement from the heart to the kidneys, right? And so there's another movement that is in the West, which is, from the south, from the heart to the kidneys in the north. And that movement depends on Yangming being open and functioning, but it also depends on the strength of the kidney fire. And so one way we treat Shaoyin is to use Fuzi, right? And Fuzi, it has the ability to draw fire from heaven into my dantian, right? Fuzi draws fire down. And so another function of the West is it strong enough to draw things down? And Yangming is about, is the pathway open, right?
Right.
So they're both related to the downward movement in the West, but one is a yin function of having the strength to pull and then store in the north. Where Yangming is about, is the pathway functioning? Is that conveyor belt functioning?
Right. So we have a bunch of these great sweeping motions that are bringing all this stuff all the way in, and they're either opening that passageway so that things can come through, or they're actively sucking that stuff down, right? The yang down into where it needs to go. And then you're saying at some point that movement goes from we're coming in like this to start coming up and out.
Right. And as it's coming down the Yangming pathway, food and fluids are coming down through the Yangming pathway. The fluid aspect, the qi related to the spleen, the damp aspect is leaving and going into, it's kind of being taken up, it's absorbed by the spleen and put into a cooking pot, right? As it's coming down, it's being put in, it's sucked in and being put into a cooking pot. We could imagine that. And so what is that? And then the dregs are dropped away. But what's actually being brought down by Yangming is fire. It's being brought down into the kidneys. The Yangming is the mediator, it's the pathway. And the Shaoyin is the strength of that pull, right? And so Yang is being brought down vertically through Yangming with the strength of Shaoyin, and the Shaoyang has to pivot that fire. So it now becomes actually the cooking pot on the fire under the cooking pot of the spleen. It's now an upward moving fire. So, and it has to be deep inside the body because fire has to be yang has to be under yin to be functional, right? So, we get it all the way down and then it turns. If it doesn't turn, then you have Shaoyin pathology. It's almost like a rusty hinge. And so those tend to be hot pathologies, right? But also it's very common, like with Shao Chai Hutang, that if the pivot doesn't turn, you get pathological heat that's specific to the pivot, the Shaoyan pivot, but you also fail to start cooking the cooking pot of the spleen. So you get spleen damp, spleen weakness, because this ministerial fire hasn't moved into position. So the Neijing says that the imperial fire rules through illumination, and the ministerial fire rules through being in position, being in the right position, and it's the Shaoyang pivot that turns it from vertical downward to vertical upward. Now it's ready to do some work in the body. It can start cooking what's been absorbed into the spleen and transforming that into usable nourishment. And that's actually where the fire pivots and it cooks in the spleen, and through the Tai Yin great sweeping motion, the earth steams it up to the lungs and to the surface of the body. And the lungs are Tai Yin, so they are related to damp and upward movement, but they're also metal. And so they descend where the metal generates water. And that's where the kidney yin comes from, is from that we call it the loop-to-loop. The great sweeping motion where Shaoyang and Tai Yin work to generate the yin of the body. Now you've got the next conformation. So it goes Shaoyang, Tai Yin. Now it's Shaoyin. And Shaoyin has the yang, and now it has the yin, right? And those two interact to generate the movement in the east. Like you have fire inside water now, and it generates the movement in the east, which is the Shui blood, right? Okay. Am I making sense? Can you see that in your mind's eye?
You are, and I can see that I can see that you're trying to sort of summarize things that you could go into a lot more detail about. So you're doing a pretty good job.
And there's lots that it says in the Neijing, like we could bring in quotes that sort of say, yeah, this is what the Neijing is talking about,
Right. So, okay. First of all, as an understanding check, I suppose that's why then Sha Chai Tang has a lot of tie-in stuff in it, really, right? Because what you're telling me is like, unless a particular process happens, the tie-in can't really do its job because it doesn't have the heat to do its job, because the heat that requires is in the wrong place right now. And so what we need to do is we need to just make sure that that heat is in a place or a state that is usable by the tie-in to start cooking all this stuff.
That's right.
Okay.
And so you can have not enough heat because there's not enough heat, but you can also have it because it's not under the cooking pot. It's blocked over here. So you get this hot pathology, but also, easy to get digestive problems with the Shao Chai Hutong pattern. Yeah.
So what Shai Chao Tang is really sort of the statement that it's making is we don't have this heat in the right place, but also because this heat hasn't been in the right place for a second, it would be good to support it and maybe kickstart it. We put the heat there and then we kind of give that even more support so that it can restart again doing what it's supposed to be doing.
That's right. Go ahead.
And what?
Yeah, it steams up the next conformation, which is Tai Yin. So it can start to generate qi and blood, but also it goes up to the lungs and the surface of the body. So the surface of our body functions more effectively, and also it ultimately will generate yin, right? Because the spleen cooking goes up to the lungs, and then it sort of like a cloud going up, 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 and then it rains. And then that replenishes the aquifers of the Shaoyin.
So staying on this for 1 second more, it seems like I think I can see how this really is a process of sort of transformation, transportation, because you've already got solids and liquid coming into the body. So you have water and food coming into the body, but it's like something needs to happen to then make those solids and fluids that are sort of proper to your body, to make them
Right,
usable by your body is the issue, right? There's still solids and fluids, but now there's solids
right,
and fluids that are, like, I guess, like you said, part of you.
right.
That's that process. Okay. I'm trying to see which question is the best question to ask you first. So, all right, let's say that's the process of the transformation of Shaoyan. You've taken that fire, which I suppose is originally imperial fire, and and now there's a ministerial fire, and we'll get to that in a second, because that's another one of those weird things I don't understand. And you put it in a place, or I suppose you turn it into a form, is another way that you can think about it, where it can do its job. That's Shaoyan. Why is Shaoyin a pivot conformation then?
Good question. So, if Shaoyang is that pivot to get the ministerial into the right position, and then through the loop-de-loop, the yin is created, kidney yin and yang interact with each other to create the next conformation, which is Shaoyin, which is the liver blood, right? And that blood, it's really likened to our venous blood, the blood that goes back up in our bodies, right? So this blood, and it's also like the way that I'm like a tree, that my wood aspect grows up, up, up. So you look at the way that a tree grows, and it's the same in our body, that the Shaoyin blood is going up, 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 and the Shaoyin is the liver and the pericardium, right? So the pericardium is this wrapper around the heart. And if we look at the correlation, and then the heart is like this space that receives light from heaven, right? So if we look at Shaoyin and think of it like a tree, we have the wood growing up, up, up. And what happens in the spring, like for me, like the moment that spring turns into summer is when the leaves come out, right? And so they grow up, 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 and then the leaves come out. Now what happens? The trees can receive light, right? So it's the same in our body, that the Yin comes all the way up to the pericardium, and and I'm not going to go into it, but there's a relationship with the Taiyang with that as well. Just like Yangming and Shaoyin are related in the West, Shaoyin and Taiyang are related in the East, but just that image of it's going up, 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 now it can come down. That's the Shaoyin pivot, right? Like now things are growing because of the yang inside my body. Now it can start the downward movement again, So it goes from the vast to the condensed, and it pivots, and it goes from the condensed back up towards the vast, and it pivots again, right? So
So
that's
it's a question. It's one of those areas where the extreme turns into its counterpart.
yeah, and one is centripetal movement and the other is centrifugal, So
Hold that thought, because we're going to come back to that. I have a question, and then Yassin's going to ask you a question. what is ministerial fire? And like I asked you,
In
an
a
easy
way, there's only one fire, but we divide it into two because we're talking about it in different aspects.
ah,
So there's just fire, right? There's just fire, but we divide fire into two. Like when we move from the Wuxing 5, there's fire, but when we get into the Liu Jing, we have two fires, and that's because fire has these two aspects, the imperial and the ministerial. And really, it's the same fire, but one is, sometimes I liken it to, like, if you get a delivery of oil into your furnace, that's the kind of coming in, like the coming in from heaven, imperial fire. But in order to heat your house, you have to bring it into your furnace and light it on fire, and then it becomes actual warmth inside your house, right? And so, the imperial fire is not usable until it becomes ministerial fire. In a way, it's like pre-heaven fire that once it comes into my body and changes position, it starts creating my post-heaven body. Now I'm creating my body into life. So that's it. It's kind of a minister of the emperor, right? Meaning it kind of carries out the edicts of the emperor. Like the emperor rules, like the Shen that's coming in through this light has all of this spiritual warmth, like love. It's got intelligence in it, and it's this blessing from heaven that's coming into me. And once it becomes the ministerial fire, it's actually informing my body. It's not only working to transform food and fluids and create blood and keep me warm, but it also is the knowing how, that knows how to run my body. And it's a warmth that makes me happy, that makes me animated, and it's got a spiritual, vibrant quality as well as a very functional quality. And all of that is the ministerial fire acting out the wishes of spirit within me.
I'd like to jump in here. I'm tempted to let the two of you just keep talking because this has been fascinating. The both of you are definitely on a roll. And it's been tremendously enjoyable. But there's something niggling, and we've sort of laid the groundwork for it. And Waleed's question about the Chaihu formula with regard to heat and so on sort of gives me a sense of where this could go. But I have a suspicion that we should address pathology explicitly. So my question would be, how does the pivot get pathological? Right. If we could maybe explicitly take that and have a look at it.
Yeah. Well, the text is called The Treatise from Undamaged from Cold, right?
Right.
And so what is cold, is a really important question, because obviously we have a lot of hot pathology, right? In the Shanghanlun, a lot of the pathology is hot, but the damage is from cold. So what is cold in a broad sense? It's it's stoppage, right? As opposed to movement. Like yang is movement and yin is stoppage. So that's one aspect. So if the pivot stops moving, like it's a rusty door, that's yin. The blockage itself is yin. The manifestation of that, the symptoms that arise from that blockage are hot. But the block itself is cold. It's the stoppage of the movement of the life force. But also, damage from cold is a broad concept where, if somebody, yells at you, for example, and tells you, you're stupid or something like that, and it's somebody you care about what they think of you, then you feel things in your body, right? Maybe you get tense in your stomach and maybe you lose your appetite for a day or so, so when somebody treats you badly, that's also cold damage. I like even if somebody is like sexually assaulted, they're actually being treated like an object for somebody else. That's very cold, right? There's no warmth in it. Warmth is like warm and caring. And, so when someone yells at you, they've lost touch with their warmth towards you, right? And you can feel it. And it comes into your body and it creates abnormality in the great sweeping motions, so I am sure that Zhang Zhongjing, well, not positive, but I think maybe Zhang Zhongjing was thinking that way, that cold is not just, it's cold outside and cold got in, and that the cold has to do with the opposite of the life force. The life force is warm and loving and nourishing. And when anything comes in and obstructs that, or weakens that, that's cold damage. And so we're always restoring, with our medicine, we're always restoring that. So there's not, for me, the Shaoyin isn't a location. It's not that there's a pathogen in Shaoyin, it's a movement. And there are, specific characteristics, like the Shaoyin, when it gets blocked and that pivot is blocked, there's often like irritability and frustration and also kind of this feeling like, it's almost like a selfish entitlement, like, like my life should be better than it is. Like life has done me wrong, as opposed, which is a kind of suffering, and opening the pivot, it creates this movement that brings in like a feeling of gratitude and more connection. So the Shaoyin movement, sort of starts in the West, but when the ministerial fire is in the right position, this warmth can spread through me. And so there's this, it kind of solves the problem of self-involvement, which is suffering. And it brings this warmth back into your being. And so, I mean, like you asked, like what causes a Shaoyin block? And, so like with everything, it's going to be some form of cold damage. That could be eating cold food, being exposed to cold weather, but also cold attitudes, and even cold attitudes that are from conditioning, like thoughts that I'm believing about myself, like if you believe you're too fat or you're ugly or, like those thoughts create cold damage in our body. And so as a practitioner, I really think that way. Like I'm always thinking about the warmth. How can I bring in and help circulate the warmth? And it ends up getting expressed in the things that I say to my patients and the way that I hear them talk, and I can hear the way that their mental habits are causing cold damage in their body. And I try to counter that with the things that I say about it. And it of course varies, amazingly, but I'm always thinking about where's the warmth, which is also love and compassion and gratitude and generosity, that warmth that is really like the biggest delight of life, that we can experience those things, so
I find that kind of fascinating. I used to have a fear of public speaking. I still do to a certain degree, but it's gotten a lot better. But I read a study at one point that I never forgot, which is, or somebody told me about a study that I never forgot, which is that speaking in public, when they hooked people up, they realized that your body has the same reactions to speaking in public that it does to being chased by a lion that wants to eat you or a mob of people that want to murder you. So I always found that really interesting because I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. I don't think my body can tell the difference between public speaking and a lion coming to eat me. I mean, that's how I imagine I would feel like facing a lion. And so there's something, I can see that there's something really very clinical about the attitudes, the fears that we have.
Yes.
Like your body actually just doesn't know the difference between a lot of those things and probably reacts the same way. Shock, I suppose, like what your circulation does with shock. You hear bad news, something clenches, and your circulation is going to do the same thing that it does in a snowstorm.
Yes.
That's fascinating. I think it's approaching the time when we're supposed to be letting you go. So I'm going to hold that thought until the next time we talk, and we'll try to go from there into discussing some of the pathologies and the herbs.
And maybe I can, in the next time we speak, I can talk about cases that especially illustrate the idea of the pivot, and where the pivot has gone wrong, and then how we restore that function.
I'm really looking for that. That would be amazing. All right. Well, thank you.
Well,
and
thank you guys. This was really fun. And
thank you very much. Yeah. It's been great. And it's a new way of thinking about a lot of things, and I'm sure we'll get into it next time. But this idea of emotions and the idea of cold as being, not just cold in the way we typically think about it, or wind not just being the way we typically think about it. It's really fascinating. So thank you for taking the time to speak to us about it.
You guys should be practitioners. You really know a lot, and you understand a lot. Like you've really done your time.
Yeah. I might take that advice.
We both might, to be honest.
Yeah, but I have a son, so I got to think about him, how to keep him alive. But thank you. I really appreciate hearing that from you. That means a lot. All right, we'll see you next time.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.